So Nikon has a new hybrid camera that is supposedly as good as the competition and yet equally affordable. Yes, I'm talking about this camera right here, which is the Z6iii. It comes with a new partially stacked sensor. Let's find out what all the hype is all about. Before we start, I do want to say something that's been on my mind, because I think you guys are probably also thinking this, right? Ever since Nikon acquired Red, there has been some expectation as to whether we're going to see any changes or new features roll out in their camera lineups. And this camera is a good example of it. Now, when we talk about cameras, I think no doubt, right, Sony has kind of become the benchmark in terms of comparison. And since this is a hybrid camera, one of the cameras that we had to compare it to was the Sony a7 IV. So as you can see on the list, there are some pretty straightforward comparisons. Starting with the sensor size, both of them are about the same, but the difference lies in the resolution. The Nikon Z6iii has only a 24.5 MP resolution, whereas the a7 IV, the Sony camera, offers a 33 megapixel sensor resolution. So there is a little bit of a difference there, and Sony has the upper hand. But when it comes to actual, like the resolution when you're recording, somehow the Sony camera does not offer 6K, whereas you have that capacity or capability with this camera. And so I think in that sense, and I even saw that when I was trying it out on my own, the file size was quite big, but at least we had that option to shoot in 6K, and hoping that Sony catches up to that soon with its hybrid lineup. Now let's get into the nitty-gritties, the details about what exactly this camera can offer. I'm talking about different features, its capacity, capabilities, but we have to start by talking about what in the world does a partially stacked sensor even mean. Now, if you guys know anything about sensors, right, they have capacitors that sort of absorb the light that falls on it. And when it is stacked together, it makes the output come out a lot faster because it's able to read much faster. So even though maybe you were like me, where you thought it was black and white, where it either had to be fully stacked or not stacked at all, I mean, clearly Nikon has proven us wrong, and with new technology, they have shown us that parts of it can be stacked and it can still increase the speed, but not to the extent that a fully stacked sensor can. In terms of the image quality, this camera certainly does not disappoint. With a 24 megapixel full frame sensor, there are a lot of capabilities that this camera has for photographers out there. Starting with the fact that you can click photos at 60 FPS full frame, so you're not losing anything at all. You also can do it at 120 FPS, but of course then it'll be cropped. But that option is still out there. It's still quite good. Now, I mean, if you can see all the images on the screen, you will notice that the dynamic range that this brings is quite good, you know, and especially for people like us out there, if you've seen our team and the other channel, right, they go out there and they shoot a lot of car videos, and you don't always have the chance to control the lighting. In that sense, dynamic range like this is really important, and it does follow through. So the 120 FPS gives you the option to shoot continuous shots at high speed, which you can see in the photos. It came across really well. I found myself somehow leaning towards taking more portrait-style photos, and I think that's probably a result of the lens that we had on hand with us, which is the 28 to 75 mm zoom lens. But I think this camera definitely offers a lot of options, especially if you're one of those you want to take candid shots that you don't have a lot of control over. It's a great option, but Nikon usually tends to do better with photos than videos, so it's not a surprise there. Now, getting into the video features this has, I was honestly quite surprised, because like I had said before, I usually expect photos to be good, not quite the same with the videos. But there are a lot of options that this camera offers. For example, you can shoot in different formats, like you have your basic H.264, you have your ProRes, you have, in this particular camera, ProRes Raw. Not just that, you can shoot 6K at 30 FPS 12-bit, which is crazy, right? And I'm going to get into that bit for the bit portion of it in a second. But yeah, apart from that, of course, it has its RAW as well, which you have in most of the Nikon cameras. Most people think when you're talking about bit, 10 versus 12-bit, what difference does that even make? It really does. So when we talk about bit, it means how much data is it collecting so that when you go onto the edit table, you can really play with it and work with it and get so much color, color options out of it, can produce a lot of colors. Now in terms of colors that it can produce, 10-bit produces 10 to 11 billion colors, whereas 12-bit produces 67 to 68 billion colors. That's a 57 billion difference. So that's a lot. Of course, that being said, as a footnote, the file size is crazy. Like even just transferring 30 photos, it was like almost 10 GB worth of data. So if you are looking at this camera specifically to get that quality and that level of quality from your footage, it's great. It's a great camera, but do keep in mind that it does need a lot of space, so be prepared and ready for it. Of course, apart from 6K, if you do want to shoot higher than at 30p, you can shoot 60p and 120p, but at 4K and then HD respectively. So those options are there if you are not wanting to use up that much space and only get, the minimum required quality out of your video. I do want to mention that the IBIS, which is the inbuilt image stabilization, which means how stable is the camera when you're moving or walking around or taking any kind of moving shots, it is quite good. It comes with 8 stops, which is a long jump from the camera that was before this, which is the Z6iii. So I definitely have to say that I felt the difference when I was shooting and walking around and moving, and you guys can see the same. Okay, time to talk about my personal thoughts about using it. I'm going to start by saying talking about the feel of this camera. I loved the grip, but it's definitely on the heavier side in comparison to most Sony cameras or Canon cameras in the same range. So it's heavier, but the grip was very comfortable. I love the fact that the screen is the rotatable screen. Again, I wish I had more options with the lenses, and I'm sure, especially for photography, if you have, say, the 200 or even the 400mm lenses, this does such an amazing, wonderful job. In terms of one of its features that it has, which is the edge detection feature, a lot of people love it. I personally thought it was quite annoying because every time I tried to put my hand against it to get a little more stable shot, the screen would turn black. Or if I rested it against something to get a low angle shot, again the screen would just go black. Instead of an edge detection technology, I would prefer just having a strap, which, as you can see, this is missing, but definitely get one when you buy this camera or any other one. I also have to say that I was quite surprised with how well this performed in low light. I was expecting it to give a lot of, grainy shots, both in terms of pictures and videos. I think the pictures came out a lot better than the videos. Like I had said before, there is an expectation for pictures to do better with Nikon, and it's the same here. So what's the verdict? I think for its range, right, budget range especially, being 2,47,990, kind of the same price range as the Sony a7 IV that I had earlier mentioned, it is something that is quite capable. Though I have to tell you that Nikon is not quite there yet with the ecosystem, right? If you want more lens options or if you want to be able to repair something, that ecosystem isn't quite as good as Sony or Canon's. But all in all, I have to say Nikon has stepped up its game and it has delivered something that people were not expecting from it. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below. Do you think this is something you would buy?